There are things a mother should never suffer at the hands of her own children. I was treated worse than an animal, used as an object, and had something precious stolen from me forever. They thought I would never have the courage, but after years of silence, one night was all it took to turn the tables. My name is Olivia Andrews. I'm 74 years old, and I live here in Columbus, Ohio. I was an elementary school teacher for nearly 4 decades until I retired in 2011. What I'm about to share is something I've carried in silence for so many years that sometimes I wonder if it wasn't all just a nightmare. But the scars on my soul don't lie. Perhaps my story will help someone who's going through situations where respect and love are forgotten within their own home. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a thumbs up to brighten this old heart. Subscribe to the channel to not miss my next life stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from, and what time is it there right now? I'm so happy to know from which corner of America and at what time of day you're listening to me. My life wasn't always as peaceful as it is now. I was born in 1951 in a small town in rural Ohio called Millfield. My childhood was simple but full of love. Daddy worked in the fields, and Mama took care of the house with that special Midwestern touch, always making apple pie that made your mouth water, with that smell of cinnamon and cloves that filled the entire house. On Sundays, after church, we would eat that chicken and dumplings that only someone from the heartland knows how to make right. I studied at the local school and early on discovered I had a knack for teaching. The teachers would always ask me to help classmates who were having difficulty. "Little Livy has a good hand for teaching," they would say. In 1969, at 18, I secured a place to study education in Columbus. It was the first time I left my hometown. Mama cried at the bus station, Daddy stayed quiet as always, but I saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. The state capitol enchanted me right away. The buildings, the movement, the Capitol Square with those well-maintained gardens. I lived in a boarding house for girls near downtown, where Mrs. Johnson took care of us as if we were her daughters. "Girl, don't come back after 6, because Columbus ain't like your little Millfield, you hear?" she would always say, with that drawn-out accent. It was at a 4th of July picnic at the school where I was doing my internship in 1971 that I met August. He was 25 and worked at the state bank. Tall, broad-shouldered, always well-dressed, and with a smile that made me nervous. He asked me to dance and afterward offered me a piece of apple pie. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone on a holiday," he said, and foolish as I was, I believed I had found my Prince Charming. The courtship was quick, as was customary in those days. In 1973, at 22, we were married in a simple ceremony at First Baptist Church. August had already bought a small house on the outskirts of the city, near what is now the Riverside neighborhood. Back then it was almost rural, with lots of greenery and few neighbors. I was radiant with my new life, my hard-working husband, my first home just for us. Little did I know that that isolated little house, which seemed so romantic to me, would be the setting for a story that still pains me to tell today. Right in the first months of marriage, I noticed August had a different way about him. He insisted on everything being his way, from bedtime to the color of the curtains. "Olivia, my wife doesn't need to worry about these decisions," he would say. At first, I found that protective manner of his endearing, but over time I noticed I had no voice in my own home. Our first daughter, April, was born in 1974, just a year after the wedding. I had just secured my first position as a teacher at a local elementary school, but August quickly decided I should stay home. "No child of mine needs a babysitter raising them when they have a mother," he said, in that voice that didn't accept discussion. I gave up my dream of teaching, at least temporarily, believing it would be best for our little girl. In 1976, our second child, Owen, was born. August was so proud to have a boy that he threw a party for the entire neighborhood. "Now I have a man to help me take care of these women," he told guests while patting his brother Jerome on the back, who had come all the way from Cincinnati to meet his nephew. Our house grew along with the family. In 1977, we had Derek, in 1978, Grace, and in 1979, the twins Thomas and Zoe. August said he wanted a big family, like in the old days. A big family is a strong family, he repeated with pride. I barely had time to breathe between one diaper and another, but each child's smile gave me strength to continue. Beyond our biological children, August had a heart that couldn't say no to a child in need. It started in 1980, when he found a boy sleeping at the door of the bank where he worked. Nathan was only 8 years old and had run away from an abusive stepfather. "Olivia, I can't leave this child on the street. We'll take care of him until they find his family," he said. But family never appeared, and Nathan ended up staying with us. Then came Diana, a 6-year-old girl that the neighborhood social worker brought because her mother was hospitalized with tuberculosis and had no one else. The mother ended up passing away, and Diana became another daughter. Then came Ivy and Arthur, siblings abandoned by their alcoholic mother. "A generous heart never gets too full," August would say, when I questioned whether we would be able to take care of so many children. Around 1985, our house already sheltered 14 children, between biological and adopted, I say in quotes, because August never regularized their situation. He said paperwork only complicated things and that family love was enough. He continued working at the bank, now as a manager, which gave us a reasonable financial condition, but it was still very tight for so many mouths to feed. Our routine was a real race against time. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to prepare breakfast for everyone. The wood stove would already start warming the kitchen while I kneaded the bread that I had left to rise the night before. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with cornbread straight from the oven was the signal for the children to start coming downstairs. First the older ones, then the little ones, in a line that seemed endless. April, now 11, helped me with the younger ones. She was a serious girl, of few words, always keeping an eye on her siblings. Owen, at 9, had his father's temperament, authoritarian, bossy with the younger siblings. Sometimes I caught him imitating August's gestures, even the way of speaking more gruffly when he was displeased. The older children went to the public school, about a mile from the house. They went on foot, always in a group. The younger ones stayed with me, playing in the large dirt yard, with some chickens scratching around, and a small garden where I grew kale, lettuce, and chives for the household. Our yard had 2 old apple trees where the boys hung old tires to make swings. There was also a small creek that ran at the back of the property, where the children liked to play on hot days, fishing for minnows with makeshift nets. "Aunt Olivia, I caught one!" they would shout excitedly when they caught a small fish that, most of the time, I told them to release back into the water. In the afternoon, after everyone returned from school, the long wooden table that August had made would fill with notebooks and books. Even though I couldn't work outside the home, I never stopped being a teacher. I taught all of them at home, helped with lessons, gave dictations, and math problems. "Education is the only thing no one can take from you," I always said, repeating what my mother told me. The years passed, and more children arrived. In 1986, a pastor from the local parish brought us 3 siblings, Olivia, Eugene, and Adam, who had lost their parents in a car accident. In 1987, 2 girls, Hannah and Quincy, daughters of a distant cousin of August who had gone to try life in New York and couldn't support them. In 1988, August himself brought home Isaac, a 5-year-old boy he found begging at the door of the market. By 1990, our family already counted 26 children. We no longer had enough rooms, so August built a shed at the back of the house where he put bunk beds for the older boys. The girls shared rooms in the main house. It was a simple life with many difficulties, but I believed we were doing good. August was strict with everyone. He demanded discipline, silence during meals, and absolute respect for his orders. "A house without order becomes chaos," he always repeated. Any disobedience was punished with a belt, something I tried to avoid, but rarely managed to interfere. "Don't undermine me in front of them, Olivia," he would say later, when we were alone. I began to notice strange things when April turned 13. She started to become increasingly quiet, avoiding being alone with her father or with some of the older brothers. Once, I found her crying hidden behind the laundry tub. "It's nothing, Mom. I'm just tired," she said, looking away. I should have insisted, should have noticed the signs, but with so many children and so many chores, I ended up letting it go. In 1990, August began bringing home some friends from the bank, men he said were important to his career. They came on weekends, brought drinks, talked loudly on the porch while the children were forced to stay quiet in their rooms. "It's just for a few hours, then they'll leave," August would say when I complained. It was during this time that I noticed the first changes in the behavior of several of the older boys. Owen, now 14, began to imitate not only his father's authoritarian manner, but also the way he looked at me and the older girls in the house. Nathan, at 18, became distant, went out a lot, and came back smelling of alcohol. Thomas, at 11, began to mistreat the animals in the yard, something he had never done before. "They're growing up. This rebellion is normal," August would say when I mentioned these changes. But deep in my heart, I knew something wasn't right. There was a heavy atmosphere in that house, something I couldn't explain. But that caused me growing anguish every time August left for work, and left me alone with all those young people who, little by little, began to look at me in a way a mother should never be looked at. It was in 1991, when I turned 40, that my life began to change dramatically. August suffered a stroke during a meeting at the bank and was hospitalized for almost a month. During this time, for the first time in years, I breathed a little more easily, without his controlling presence. It was when I realized how much my children were turning into people I no longer recognized. With August in the hospital, the house felt different. It was as if a weight had been temporarily lifted from our shoulders. The children spoke louder, laughed more freely, and I found myself breathing more easily. "Will he get better soon, Mom?" asked Grace, then 13, in a way that didn't seem to long for a positive answer. I visited August every day at the hospital. The doctors said the stroke had been severe, that he might never walk properly again, that he would need constant care. "You're going to need a lot of strength, Mrs. Andrews," said Dr. Evans, an elderly gentleman with gray hair and tired eyes who seemed to understand more than just my husband's clinical condition. When I got home after the visits, I found a strange silence. The children seemed to avoid me, especially the older ones. Owen, now a young man of 15, began to assume his father's role. "Mom, don't forget to lock the gate properly. These bills need to be paid by tomorrow," he would say, in a tone that reminded me so much of August that sometimes it startled me. After 3 months in the hospital, August returned home, but he was no longer the same man. Half of his face paralyzed, difficulty speaking, dependent on a wheelchair. His personality also changed, quieter, more bitter, with bouts of anger that made the younger children run to hide. "Useless. Now I'm useless," he would mutter between his teeth when he thought no one was listening. It was during this time that I needed to get a job. The bank offered disability retirement for August, but it wasn't enough to support that entire family. I secured a position as a teacher at a public school not far from home, thanks to my teaching degree that had been stored away for almost 20 years. "Do you have experience?" asked the principal. "Does raising and educating 26 children count as experience?" I replied, and she smiled sympathetically. With my going out to work, the household dynamics completely changed. April, then 17, was put in charge of taking care of her father in the house while I was out. The older ones helped with the younger ones, and I left everything organized before leaving. Food prepared, clothes washed, list of tasks for each one. "Go, Olivia. Go earn the bread that I can no longer bring," August told me on the first day I left for work. There was a mix of shame and resentment in his voice that broke my heart. The first months were difficult, but gradually we found a new rhythm. I would leave at 6:30 in the morning and return at 5:30 in the afternoon. I taught elementary school, children between 7 and 10 years old. It was tiring, but I felt alive again, useful. The school children called me Ms. Olivia, and I returned home with stories about their progress, their drawings, their curious questions. It was in 1992, almost a year after August's stroke, that I began to notice worrying changes at home. I would arrive exhausted from work and find the house increasingly messy. The younger children seemed frightened, hiding in corners. April was increasingly quiet, with deep dark circles and an empty look. "Is everything okay?" I would ask. "Just tiredness, Mom," she would answer, averting her eyes. One night, I woke up to muffled crying coming from the girls' room. I got up quietly so as not to wake August, who now slept in an adapted room on the ground floor, and followed the sound. It was Quincy, then 10 years old, curled up in bed, hugging her sister Hannah. "What happened, my flower?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I had a nightmare, that's all," she answered, but her look told a different story. Hannah just squeezed her sister's hand tighter. Around this same time, Nathan and some of the older boys began bringing alcohol into the house. They hid the bottles in the back shed, but I found the evidence, the smell on their breath, empty bottles thrown in the yard, altered behavior. "It's just a little beer now and then, Mom. What's the harm?" said Thomas, then 13, but with a way of speaking that seemed much older. One Sunday afternoon, returning early from the farmer's market, I found an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. I entered quietly and heard male voices coming from the living room. They were 3 men I had never seen before, talking with Owen and Nathan. When they saw me, there was a sudden silence. "They're just friends from school, Mom," Owen explained quickly. The men said goodbye and left hurriedly. Later that same day, I found April crying at the laundry tub. "What's happening in this house, daughter?" I asked, holding her hands in mine. She hesitated, then looked around as if making sure we were alone. "Something wrong is happening here, Mom. The boys. They've been different since Dad got sick. They bring strange people, they drink, and—" She stopped, as if the next words were too heavy to come out. "And what, daughter?" I insisted. "Nothing, Mom. Forget it. Just keep an eye on the younger girls, okay?" she said, wiping away her tears and returning to her tasks. That incomplete conversation kept hammering in my head for days. I began to pay more attention, to come home at different times, to ask questions to the younger children. I noticed that some of the girls, especially the younger ones like Olivia and Quincy, avoided being alone with certain boys in the house. Diana, then 15, began locking her bedroom door at night, something she had never done before. One night, close to 10 o'clock, I needed to go to the kitchen to get medicine for August. The house was quiet, everyone supposedly asleep. In the corridor that led to the kitchen, I heard muffled voices coming from the back shed. I approached slowly, and through the window crack saw a scene that froze my blood. Owen, Nathan, Arthur, and 2 older men whom I recognized as the friends who had visited the house. They were drinking, laughing softly, and counting money. "Next week there's more," said one of the men, putting something in a folder. "Just don't mention it to the old lady, understood?" he added, clearly referring to me. I returned to the room with trembling legs, completely forgetting about August's medicine. What was happening in my own house? What kind of business were my sons doing behind my back? In the following weeks, I noticed more strange things. Baby clothes hidden in a basement closet. A hushed conversation about when she'll be ready. Money that mysteriously appeared, which Owen said was from odd jobs that he and the boys did in the city. And most disturbingly, Grace, my 14-year-old daughter, with morning sickness that she tried to hide. I decided to confront her on a Sunday, when I managed to be alone with her in the yard. "Daughter, you need to tell me what's happening," I said, looking directly into her eyes. She looked away, but I saw when a tear ran down her face. "I can't, Mom. They'll hurt me if I tell. They'll hurt you too." Those words hit me like a punch. "Who will hurt you, daughter? Who is threatening you?" She just shook her head, wiped away her tears, and ran inside the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything I had observed in recent months. The changes in the boys' behavior, the girls' fear, the strange men, the money, the baby clothes. It was a week after that day that I found Grace vomiting in the bathroom early in the morning, before I left for school. "It's just an upset stomach, Mom," she said, but there was something in her look that broke me inside. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" I asked in a low voice. She didn't answer with words, but her silence and the tears that ran freely were answer enough. "Who is the father?" I asked, already fearing the answer. She just shook her head, unable to speak. That same night, after everyone seemed to have gone to sleep, I heard sounds coming from Grace's room. I got up silently and walked down the dark corridor. The bedroom door was ajar, and what I saw through the crack left me paralyzed. Owen, my own son, sitting on the edge of Grace's bed, holding her arm firmly while saying in a low but threatening voice, "You didn't tell her anything, did you? Because if you did..." I couldn't hear the rest. I returned to my room with my heart pounding, my mind trying to process the unthinkable. What was happening under my own roof? What were my own children doing to each other and to me? The next day, I missed work for the first time. I waited for everyone to leave, the older ones for their odd jobs, the younger ones for school, and began a desperate search through the house. In the back of Nathan's closet, I found a notebook with notes, dates, values. In Owen's belongings, a wad of cash that a teacher like me would take months to earn. And in the back shed, hidden under a loose board, something that confirmed my worst fears, photos. Photos that no mother should ever see. Photos that clearly showed the horror that was happening in my own house. When August woke up and saw me sitting in the living room, surrounded by that evidence with my face marked by tears, he just asked, "You found out, didn't you?" And at that moment, I understood that he knew. Maybe he didn't know everything, but he knew enough. And his silence made him complicit. "How could you allow this?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and disappointment. What could I do, trapped in this chair? They threatened me too, Olivia. Said they would abandon me, leave me to die alone if I told. At that moment, something broke inside me. The man for whom I had sacrificed my dreams, the father of my children, had allowed our home to transform into a place of horror. And I, too busy trying to keep a roof over our heads, hadn't seen the signs until it was too late. "What happened to Grace? It wasn't the first time, was it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. August just looked away, confirming my fear. "They sold the other babies, didn't they? That's what I saw that day. The money, the men." "Olivia, you don't understand. They are out of control. They are no longer those children we raised." After that conversation with August, I realized I was alone, completely alone in a house full of people. I spent the entire night awake, thinking about what to do. Report my own sons? Run away with the younger girls? Confront Owen and the others? The next morning, I called April for a conversation in the yard, away from August's ears and the others. "I need you to tell me everything, daughter. I can't help if I don't know what's happening." April, with tears in her eyes, finally let the story out. After August had the stroke, Owen and Nathan, then 16 and 19, began to feel like owners of the house. At first it was small things, demands, orders, absurd rules they imposed on the younger siblings. Then they started bringing friends, older men they met on the street or at work. "It started with Diana," she told me, her voice almost a whisper. "She was pretty. She was 15. They would take her to the shed at night. They said if she told you, they would do the same to the younger girls." My heart tightened so much I thought it would stop. And then there were others. Olivia, Hannah, and now Grace. "And you?" I asked, holding her hands. She didn't answer, just lowered her head, and that was answer enough. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked, feeling an immense guilt for not having been present, for not having seen. "They said they would hurt Dad if we talked, that they would hurt you." that no one would believe us because we were just the adopted ones, children with no value. And she hesitated. And what, daughter? And they said that you knew, that you let it happen because we needed the money. Those words hit me like a slap. My own sons using my name to justify those atrocities. What money, April? The money from the men who came here. The money from the babies. It was then that I fully understood the horror that was happening under my roof. It wasn't just Grace. There were others before her, and the babies born from those abuses were sold for illegal adoption. The friends who visited the house were intermediaries, perhaps even parents interested in buying children. How many times? I asked, my voice failing. 3 that I know of. The first was Diana, almost 2 years ago. Then Olivia. Now Grace. I ran my hand across my face, trying to process that information. And me? Did they ever? April looked away. They talk about you when they drink. They say that you would be next, that they were just waiting for the right moment. A shiver ran down my spine. My own sons planning to violate me, use me as they had used my girls. The shock was so great that I was breathless for a moment. I'm going to get you out of here, I said, determined. The girls, at least. They won't let us go, Mom. They have connections now, dangerous people. You have no idea what they're capable of. In the days that followed, I tried to act normally, as if I knew nothing, while planning an escape. I called some shelters, but none had space for so many girls at once. I thought about reporting to the police, but I feared for the children's safety if the older boys found out before we could get out of there. One night, about 2 weeks after this conversation with April, I returned later from work. The school had a teachers' meeting that extended beyond normal hours. I arrived home around 7:30 p.m. when I normally arrived at 5:30 p.m. The house was strangely silent. The younger children should already be sleeping, but there was no sign of even the older ones, only a dim light coming from August's room on the ground floor. I entered silently, leaving my purse on the kitchen table. That's when I heard voices coming from the back shed. I immediately recognized Owen's voice and that of one of the men who frequented the house. I approached carefully along the side of the house until I reached a window that gave a partial view of the shed's interior. What I saw froze me in place. There were about 10 men inside, including Owen, Nathan, Thomas, and some of the other older boys. They were in a circle, and in the center was Grace, standing, trembling, with her face marked by tears. One of the men was holding her arm firmly, while another was saying something about value for the complete package. I retreated, horrified, and in my haste tripped over a bucket that was in the yard. The noise alerted the men inside the shed. "There's someone out there," one of them shouted. I ran into the house, locking the kitchen door behind me. Seconds later, I heard violent knocking. "Mom, open this door!" shouted Owen. "I'll call the police," I replied, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "If you call the police, Grace will suffer, and so will you." I took a deep breath, seeking courage. "Let Grace in. Just her." There was a moment of silence, then Owen answered, "Fine, but afterward we need to talk." The door opened just enough for Grace to enter, and then was closed again. The girl ran into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I took her to my room and locked the door. "What were they doing to you?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. They were showing me to those men, saying that—" She couldn't finish, choked by tears. I hugged my daughter tightly, feeling her fragile body trembling. "It's going to be okay. I'll get you out of here. I'll get all of you out." But even as I said those words, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The doorknob turned, and then came the knocking. "Mom, we need to talk." Owen's voice sounded from the other side, falsely calm. "Open the door." "Go away. We'll talk tomorrow," I answered, holding Grace closer. "That's not how it works anymore. Either you open that door now, or we'll break it down." I had never heard my son speak like that, with such coldness, such threat in his voice. "I'm going to call the police," I threatened again. A dry laugh came from the other side of the door. "And say what? That you can't control your own children? That you have a house full of undocumented children? That you didn't notice what was happening under your nose for 2 years?" Each word was like a knife, especially because there was some truth in them. How would I explain to the authorities that I had allowed this to happen even without knowing? The door began to shake with the knocking. "We're going to count to 3, Mom. 1. I looked around, desperate, searching for a way out, a weapon, anything. 2. That's when I heard August's voice. "What's happening here?" The knocking stopped. "Nothing, Dad. Mom is in the room with Grace and won't open up. We're concerned." Concerned? August's voice sounded weak but firm. "I saw the men leaving through the back. What were they doing here?" "Friends of mine. They came to play cards." "Don't lie to me, boy." August's voice rose in tone, surprising even me. "I know what you've been doing. Olivia told me everything." There was a moment of silence, then I heard footsteps moving away. Minutes later, a light knock on the door. "Olivia, it's me. The boys are gone." I opened the door carefully. August was there in his wheelchair, his face pale. Behind him, in the corridor, were April and some of the younger girls, all with expressions of fear. "They'll be back," said August, entering the room. "When they realize I was bluffing. We can't stay here." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "They won't stop. They're involved with dangerous people. People who pay well for babies." The difficulty with which he said these words showed how much the reality disgusted him too. "You knew all along," I accused, the anger returning. "Not at the beginning. I found out a few months ago when I overheard a conversation between Owen and Nathan. I tried to talk to them, but—" He pointed to his own physical condition. "They threatened me. Said they would abandon me, that I would die alone if I told you. And you believed that? You preferred to protect yourself rather than protect your daughters?" August's face contorted with shame. "I was weak, Olivia. Weak and a coward. But now I'm here, and we need to get the girls out of this house before they come back." That night, we lived through hours of pure terror. We called the only person we could trust, Jerome, August's brother, who lived in Cincinnati. He promised to come get us, but it would take at least 3 hours to arrive. Meanwhile, we barricaded the doors and gathered the younger girls in my room. The hours dragged on, every noise from outside making us jump. I tried to calm the children by telling stories, pretending a tranquility that was far from what I felt. Around midnight, we heard a car stop in front of the house. Then, footsteps and altered voices. Owen and the others had returned, and they weren't alone. "Mom, we know you're in there. Open the door or we'll break it down." Heart racing, I instructed the children to hide in the bathroom. August stayed in the living room, in his chair, as the last barrier between the boys and the girls. The knocking on the door intensified until finally we heard the wood splinter. They had entered. What happened next was like a slow-motion nightmare. Owen and Nathan entered first, followed by 3 men I didn't recognize. August tried to stop them, but was easily pushed aside, his wheelchair tipping over. "Where's Grace?" demanded Owen, now without any pretense of respect. "She's not here," I lied, trying to buy time. "I took her to a friend's house." Owen approached me, his face inches from mine. I could smell alcohol on his breath. "You're lying. We know they're all here." That's when he grabbed me by the arm, with such force that I felt his fingers sink into my flesh. "Now you're going to listen to us, and listen well. This house is ours now. These children are ours. And you?" He smiled in a way that chilled my soul. "You are finally going to understand your place in this family." He dragged me toward the stairs while I struggled and screamed. The other men began to search the house, looking for the girls. At the moment when all seemed lost, we heard the siren of a police car approaching. Owen's expression instantly changed from triumph to panic. "Who called the police? Was it you?" he shouted, squeezing my arm even more. At that moment, August spoke from the position where he had fallen. "It was me. Even before you arrived. It's over, son. It's over." Owen released me as if he had been burned, and he and the other men ran to the back of the house. Seconds later, we heard the noise of a car taking off at high speed. When the police finally entered, they found a scene of devastation. Broken furniture, doors smashed, and a shattered family. But we were alive. The girls were safe for now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of that nightmare. What I didn't know was that that night would be just the beginning of an even more difficult period. The boys had fled, but not disappeared, and they weren't willing to give up the lucrative business they had built, nor their revenge against me for having reported them. The police took statements from all of us that night, but I knew we didn't have much time. Owen and the others had fled, but they wouldn't go far. They had contacts, money, and most importantly, a business they wouldn't easily abandon. Sergeant Adams, a middle-aged man with tired eyes that seemed to have seen everything, advised me to leave the house as soon as possible. "Do you have somewhere to go with the children?" he asked, while his men were still collecting evidence around the house. "My husband's brother is coming from Cincinnati," I replied. "He should arrive in a few hours." The sergeant shook his head. "Mrs. Andrews, with all due respect, a patrol car can't stay here indefinitely, and when it dawns, our shift ends. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood perfectly. As soon as the police left, we would be vulnerable again. And as much as I wanted to believe that my children wouldn't be capable of physically harming us, the scene that night had proven otherwise. "I understand," I replied. "We'll leave as soon as Jerome arrives." The sergeant handed me a card with his personal number. "If you need anything, call me. We can't always act officially in these family situations, but we can always try to help." Those words, although kind, tore me apart inside. Family situations. That's how the world saw the horror we were living, just another case of a family dispute. Around 4 a.m, Jerome finally arrived. He had driven all night from Cincinnati, and his face showed shock at seeing the state of the house and August, fallen on the living room floor when he arrived, refusing to be put back in his wheelchair. "My God, what happened here?" Jerome asked as he embraced his brother. "The house fell," August replied with a bitter laugh. "The house literally fell, brother." We quickly explained the situation, or at least enough for him to understand the urgency. Jerome, a practical man who worked as a supervisor in a dairy factory, didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and asked, "How many are going in my car?" There were 13 girls under 18 in the house that night, besides me and August. Jerome's car could hold a maximum of 7 people, including him. "We'll have to make 2 trips, he said. "We don't have time for that," I replied. "When it dawns, they might come back. And if they catch us on the road—" I didn't need to finish the sentence. The silence weighed on us like a dark cloud. It was Grace, with her 4-month belly already beginning to show, who suggested, "We can take a bus, Mom. I know there's one that leaves at 5:30 in the morning for Cincinnati." I looked at the wall clock, almost 5 o'clock. "We won't be able to get everything ready in time." "Then we don't get ready," said April, with a determination I had never seen in her before. "We take only what we can carry. Clothes, documents, medicines. The rest stays. The rest stays." It was an idea so simple and so painful at the same time. To leave behind the house that had been my home for almost 20 years. The furniture that August and I had bought with so much sacrifice. The photos, the memories, the little treasures accumulated over a lifetime. But looking at the frightened faces of my girls, I realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was getting them out of there, taking them to a safe place where they could be children again, not merchandise. All right, I decided. Jerome takes August and the 4 youngest in the car. I'll go with the rest on the bus. We'll meet at the Cincinnati bus station. In less than 20 minutes, each of the girls had filled a bag or backpack with essentials. I ran to the bedroom, got my documents, some clothes, and, on impulse, our wedding photo album. It was foolish, perhaps, but at that moment I felt a need to cling to a memory of when we were happy, or at least thought we were. Sergeant Adams offered us a patrol car to take us to the bus station. On the way, I observed the streets of Columbus beginning to wake up. Bakers opening their shops, some early workers waiting at bus stops, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. A normal day for the city, while our lives were falling apart. At the bus station, I bought 13 tickets for the next bus to Cincinnati, using almost all the savings I had set aside for emergencies. Jerome had already departed with August and the younger girls. While we waited on the platform, I kept the girls close, my eyes constantly scanning the crowd for familiar faces. It was when we were already boarding that I saw him, Nathan, standing on the other side of the platform, watching. Our gazes crossed for an instant, and I saw something in his eyes that I will never forget. It wasn't anger, nor hatred. It was a calculating coldness, as if he were evaluating a product that had just escaped from his hands. I pushed April, who was in front of me, into the bus. "Quick, all of you get in," I whispered urgently. But it was too late. Nathan was already moving in our direction, and I saw that he wasn't alone. Thomas and 2 men I didn't recognize were with him. "Mom," began Grace, fear evident in her voice. "Get on the bus," I repeated, trying to stay calm. "I'll be right behind you." When the last of the girls entered, I turned to face my sons. Nathan arrived first, stopping a few steps away from me. "Where do you think you're going, Mom?" he asked, with a false sweetness in his voice. "Away from you," I answered simply. He laughed, a sound that had nothing cheerful about it. "And you think we'll let you? After everything you did? After everything I did?" My voice rose an octave. "You abused your own sisters, sold babies, and I'm the one who did something wrong?" Nathan looked around, worried that someone might hear. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know perfectly well. And if you don't let me go right now, I'm going to scream for this entire bus station to hear what you did." It was a desperate bluff, but it worked. Nathan took a step back, looking nervously at the security guards at the bus station who were passing not far away. "You won't get far," he threatened. "We know where Uncle Jerome lives. We'll find you." "Then I'll go even further," I replied. "And if you come near the girls again, I swear to God I'll make you pay." At that moment, the bus driver honked, indicating it was time to leave. I turned my back on my sons and climbed the steps, feeling their gazes on my back like sharp knives. I sat next to Grace, who was trembling like a leaf. The bus began to move, and through the window I saw Nathan and the others standing on the platform, watching our departure with expressions that mixed anger and calculation. "They're going to come after us, aren't they?" asked Grace, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Probably," I answered honestly, "but we won't be there when they arrive." It was at that moment, with the bus leaving Columbus behind, that something broke inside me. It wasn't just sadness or fear. It was a fury I had never felt before. A primitive, visceral anger, directed not only at my sons, but at myself, for not having seen, for not having protected, for having been so blind for so long. Tears were running down my face, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of determination. There, in that jostling bus, I made a promise to myself and to the girls who trusted me. We would never be victims again. Never again. When we arrived in Cincinnati, Jerome was already waiting for us at the local bus station. August was in the car with the younger girls, his face a mask of shame and remorse. "What happened?" asked Jerome, noticing my expression. "Nathan and the others saw us leaving," I replied. "They know where we're going." Jerome cursed softly. "My house isn't safe then." No, I agreed. We need to go further away. It was then that Grace, who had remained silent, spoke. My Aunt Zelda lives in Indianapolis. She always said I could visit her whenever I wanted. Indianapolis was more than 100 miles from Columbus in Indiana, far enough to give us some time at least. Do you have the address? I asked. Grace nodded. She used to write me letters sometimes. I have the address memorized. Indianapolis, then, Jerome decided. But we need to go now. If Nathan knows you're with me, it won't take long for him to show up. He took us to a cheap hotel near the bus station, where we could rest for a few hours before continuing our journey. In the small, simple room that I shared with April and Grace, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the lights of Cincinnati, thinking about what we had left behind and what we still had ahead. Mom? Grace's voice pulled me from my thoughts. What's going to happen to my baby? The question caught me off guard. With everything that had happened, I had almost forgotten about Grace's pregnancy. A baby conceived in violence, but still, an innocent baby. What do you want to happen? I asked softly. She hesitated, her hands caressing the small bulge in her belly. I want to keep him, she said finally. I know it will be difficult, but he's my child. I felt a wave of admiration for that girl. No, that woman, who, even after everything she had been through, still found in herself the capacity to love. Then we'll take care of him together, I promised, holding her hands. It was that night, in a hotel room in Cincinnati, that I made the hardest decision of my life. It wasn't enough to run away. It wasn't enough to hide. We had to completely cut ties with the past. Leave behind not just a house, but an entire life. The next morning, before we departed for Indianapolis, I asked Jerome for paper and pen. I sat at the small table in the hotel room and wrote 2 letters. The first was addressed to the principal of the school where I taught, explaining that I needed to resign immediately due to serious family reasons. The second was for Owen, Nathan, and the others. In this second letter, I poured out everything I felt: the disappointment, the anger, the pain of having been betrayed by my own children. I said that I never wanted to see them again, that I no longer considered them my children, and that if they tried to find us, I wouldn't hesitate to report them to the police, regardless of the consequences for me or the family name. If you have a shred of decency, I wrote in the last lines, use the dirty money you earned to take care of your father, who is not to blame for having raised monsters. I handed the letters to Jerome, asking him to mail the first and deliver the second personally, if and when Owen or the others appeared looking for us. When we finally boarded the bus to Indianapolis, I was different. The woman who left Columbus was no longer the same one who had entered. Something had fundamentally changed inside me. Fear and shame had given way to an iron resolution. Looking at the sleeping girls in the seats around me, exhausted after a poorly slept night, I promised myself that from then on, no one would ever hurt them again. No one would ever treat them as objects, as merchandise. And me? I would never again be the submissive and blind woman who had allowed that horror to happen right under my nose. The road to Indianapolis unfolded before me, a symbol of the new path we were about to tread. As the bus cut through the interior of Ohio and Indiana, I planned our new life. Without a home, with little money and 15 mouths to feed, including August, who needed constant care. It seemed impossible, but at that moment I was willing to face any obstacle. We arrived in Indianapolis in the late afternoon. The city was larger than I had imagined, with wide avenues and a movement that reminded me a little of Columbus. We took a taxi to the address that Grace had memorized, in the Fountain Square neighborhood, an area of simple houses and tree-lined streets. Zelda, Grace's aunt, was a lady of about 65 who had worked as a nurse all her life. When she saw us, a woman with deep dark circles accompanied by 13 girls, a man in a wheelchair, and his brother, her expression was one of absolute astonishment. "Grace? What happened, my child?" she asked, embracing her niece. We all stood on the sidewalk in front of her house, a small but well-maintained two-story house, until she noticed our state of exhaustion. "Come in, all of you," she said, opening the gate wider. "We'll talk later." That night, after the girls were accommodated around the house, some on the sofa, others on makeshift mattresses on the floor, and the smallest in a guest room, I told Zelda a softened version of our story. I said that the boys had gotten involved with dangerous people, that they were threatening the girls, and that we had to flee to protect them. Zelda, with the wisdom of someone who had seen a lot in life, just nodded without asking many questions. "You can stay here until you get settled," she said. "It's not big, but we'll make do." Jerome returned to Cincinnati the next day, promising to help us with whatever was needed. He would send our clothes and some belongings we had left at his house, and would give us news if Owen or the others showed up there. In the first days in Indianapolis, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every time an unfamiliar car passed on the street, every time someone knocked at the door, my heart raced. The girls were also frightened, especially Grace, who feared that the boys would come after her because of the baby. But the days passed, then weeks, and no one came. Jerome informed us that, indeed, Owen and Thomas had appeared at his house, demanding to know where we were. He delivered my letter and said he had no idea where we had gone after Cincinnati. The boys were furious, but eventually left. Meanwhile, we began to settle in Indianapolis. With Zelda's help, I secured a job as a substitute teacher at a public school. It wasn't much, but it was a start. April, then 18, got a job as a cashier at a bakery. The older girls took care of the younger ones, and August while we were out. Zelda was our salvation in those first months. Not only did she welcome us into her home, but she used her contacts in the healthcare area to get medical care for Grace and physical therapy for August. It was also she who introduced us to Mrs. Eunice, a lady who rented rooms in a family boarding house not far from there. 3 months after our arrival, when we had already saved some money, we moved to Mrs. Eunice's boarding house. There were 4 large rooms on the second floor of an old 2-story house. It wasn't ideal, we were still cramped with 3 or 4 people per room, but it was ours, a place where we could begin to rebuild our lives. It was there, at Mrs. Eunice's boarding house, that Grace gave birth to her son in December 1992. A healthy boy she named Gabriel, messenger of God, she explained, because despite everything, he came to bring hope. Holding that baby in my arms, looking at his little face that had nothing of the men who had hurt Grace, I felt a wave of love so intense that it left me breathless. Gabriel was innocent, a new beginning, the living proof that even from the most horrible situations, something pure and beautiful could be born. Over the course of the following year, our situation gradually improved. I secured a permanent contract at the school and even began giving private lessons on weekends to supplement the income. April was promoted to manager of the bakery. Diana and Olivia, now 17 and 16, began working part-time as attendants in a clothing store. August, however, was increasingly dejected. The physical therapy had helped recover part of his mobility, but he would never be the same again. It wasn't just the physical condition. It was something deeper, a depletion of the soul that seemed to consume him from within. "I can't look at you without remembering what I allowed to happen," he told me one night, when we were alone. "Every time I see Grace with Gabriel, every time I see the fear in the girl's eyes, I know it was my fault." "It was all our fault," I replied, unable to feel the anger that had consumed me before. I also didn't see what was happening right under my nose. But I knew, Olivia. I knew and did nothing. What kind of man does that make me? I had no answer to that question. August had failed, yes, but so had I. All of us, in some way, had failed those children. In May 1994, a little more than 2 years after our flight from Columbus, I received a call from Jerome. His tone of voice told me something was wrong before he even spoke. "Olivia, I think you need to know. Owen has been arrested." My heart skipped a beat. "Arrested? Why?" Human trafficking. It seems he and the others were involved in a network that sold babies for illegal adoption. The police conducted a big operation, caught several of them. I sat down, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Who else? I asked, fearing the answer. Nathan, Thomas, Arthur, some of the men they worked with. It was in the newspapers here, quite a scandal. After hanging up the phone, I sat for a long time, staring into space. It was the end of a cycle. There was no longer a need to look over my shoulder, to fear that they would find us. They were in prison, facing justice for their crimes. That night, I gathered the whole family in the living room of the boarding house. August, the girls, little Gabriel, who was already crawling everywhere. I told them about Owen's and the others' arrests. There were tears, of course, because despite everything, they were still family. But there was also a collective feeling of relief, as if a weight had finally been lifted from our shoulders. "Does this mean we can go back home?" asked one of the younger girls, Quincy, who was then 12 years old. I looked around, at that simple but welcoming room where we had spent the last 2 years. At the sofa where August sat every afternoon to read stories to the girls. At the corner where Gabriel had his toys. At the small garden that Hannah had started to grow in the backyard. "We are already home," I replied. "This is our home now." And it was true. Indianapolis had become our home. The wounds were still there, of course, but they were beginning to heal. The girls were starting to smile again, to play, to be children again. Grace, at 16, was a dedicated mother and had gone back to school, determined to give Gabriel a better future. 2 months after Owen's arrest, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Derek, one of my biological sons, who was 17 when we left Columbus. He wasn't involved in Owen's scheme. He was one of the few older boys who had kept his distance. "Mom," he wrote, "I found out where you are through Uncle Jerome. I want you to know that I had nothing to do with what the others did. I tried to stop them a few times, but they were stronger, more numerous. I'm living in Louisville now, working and studying. I would really like to see you, if you'll allow it." That letter opened a door that I thought was forever closed. Derek was the first, but not the last. Gradually, other children who hadn't participated in the abuses began to seek us out, sorry for not having done anything, anxious to reconnect with the family. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of distrust, a lot of fear to overcome. But gradually, with a lot of care and clear boundaries, we allowed some of them to become part of our lives again. In early 1995, we managed to buy a house, nothing fancy, but spacious enough for all of us. It was located in the Irvington neighborhood, a quiet area with many trees and a playground nearby where Gabriel loved to play. It was the first time since we left Columbus that I felt we really had a home of our own. On moving day, as I watched the excited girls exploring the rooms, August approached in his wheelchair. His face, previously constantly marked by guilt and shame, seemed a little lighter. "We did it, Olivia," he said, taking my hand. "Against all odds, we did it." I looked at him, the man who had been as much part of the problem as part of the solution. I hadn't completely forgiven, perhaps I never would. But I had learned to live with the past without letting it define our future. "Yes, August," I replied, squeezing his hand back. "We did it." And as the sun set that day, tinting the Indianapolis sky orange and pink, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in years. We had passed through the fire and survived. We were singed, marked forever in some way, but we were alive. And more importantly, we were free. Free from fear, free from violence, free from the silence that for so long had been our jailer. Free to build a new life based on respect, mutual care, and true love, not the sick, possessive love that had destroyed our family, but the love that liberates, that heals, that redeems. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I slept a deep sleep without nightmares, wrapped in the certainty that the worst was behind us. 33 years have passed since those difficult days. Today, at 74, I've returned to Columbus. not to the same house, of course. I sold that one back in 1995 through Jerome, who took care of all the paperwork. The money helped pay for our house in Indianapolis, where we lived for more than 20 happy years. August passed away in 2005 after a second stroke, stronger than the first. Despite everything we went through, we managed to build a relationship of respect in the last years of his life. He never completely forgave himself for what happened, but he found some peace helping to raise Gabriel and being a present grandfather to him. I returned to Columbus in 2016, already retired, when Gabriel decided to study medicine at Ohio State University. "Grandma, come with me," he asked. "I'll need someone who can make that chicken and dumplings of yours." How could I say no to that boy who brought so much light into our lives? Grace came too. With a degree in nursing, she managed to transfer to the university hospital, where she still works today. My current house is in the Clintonville neighborhood, not far from the university campus. It's small but cozy, with a garden in the back where I grow my vegetables and flowers. The walls are decorated with photographs of the whole family, and what a large family it has become. April married a math teacher and had 3 children. She lives in Cincinnati, but comes to visit me regularly. Diana became a psychologist, specializing in childhood trauma. "I want to help other children not to go through what we went through," she told me when she chose the profession. Olivia is an elementary school teacher like I was. Hannah discovered a talent for painting and today has a studio in the historic center of Indianapolis. Quincy works with Gabriel at the university hospital as a nursing technician. As for my children who didn't participate in the abuses, with some, I managed to rebuild a relationship. Derek, who was the first to seek us out, is now an engineer in Louisville and comes to have lunch with me one Sunday a month, bringing his grandchildren to visit. Grace and Zoe also became part of my life again, after much therapy and sincere conversations. The others, well, Owen served 15 years in prison and then disappeared. I heard he went to Mexico. Nathan died in prison during a riot in 1999. Thomas, after leaving jail, sought psychiatric help and lives today in a shelter for people with mental disorders. The rest, some served their sentences, others fled, and of some I never heard again. And that's okay. Gabriel graduated with honors in 2022 and today is doing his residency in pediatrics. Seeing that boy, born in such terrible circumstances, transform into a dedicated doctor who saves children's lives is perhaps the greatest symbol of our journey of overcoming. My routine today is peaceful. I wake up early, make my coffee, take care of the plants. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteer teaching literacy to adults at a community center. On Sundays, the house fills with voices when children and grandchildren who live nearby come for lunch. Grace prepares the food. She learned all my Midwestern cooking secrets and even added some of her own. At night, I like to sit on the porch and observe the sky. Sometimes I think about how life takes turns. Who would have thought that after everything, I would return to Columbus? Not out of fear or obligation, but by choice. This city is no longer a place of nightmares for me. I reclaim the right to walk its streets without looking back, to enjoy its parks and its flowering dogwoods in spring. I won't lie and say there are no difficult days. There are moments when the memories return, when I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. Trauma never completely disappears, but I've learned to live with it, to not let it define or dominate my days. What I'm most proud of is seeing the strong women my girls have become. None of them allowed themselves to be destroyed by what they lived through. Each one, in her own way, transformed pain into strength, trauma into wisdom. They are my greatest achievement, my most precious legacy. And Gabriel. Gabriel is our particular miracle, a daily reminder that even from the darkest situations, light can be born. When I see him with his white coat, saving lives, I remember Grace's words when he was born. He is a messenger of hope. The cycle of abuse was broken. Where there was pain, now there is healing. Where there was fear, now there is courage. Where there was silence, now there are voices rising to tell their stories and help others tell theirs. This is my life today. A good life, rich in affection and meaning. A life that I built from the ashes of what was once my worst nightmare. And if there is one lesson that I learned throughout this entire journey, it is that we should never, ever lose hope. Because even in the darkest night, there are always stars guiding our way back to the light. My dear viewers, if you are going through difficult times right now, if you feel there is no way out, I want you to know, there is always a tomorrow. There is always a path, even when we can't see it through the tears. Life isn't easy, especially when we face situations that seem impossible. But as I discovered in my own journey, we are stronger than we imagine. For those who have the privilege of never having suffered abuse, I ask, be alert. Observe signs of suffering in those around you. Sometimes, an attentive look, a sincere question, a hug at the right moment can save a life. Be that person I so needed in my darkest moments. Dignity and respect are universal values, no matter where you are. Extend your hand. Be part of the solution. Together, as a global community, we can make a difference. And now, my dears, before I end, I want to make a special request. If this story touched your heart, if you felt a connection with my words, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing stories of overcoming that can help other people who are going through difficult times. Each time that bell rings, it's as if a new light is lit in the world, illuminating the path of someone who needs hope. And leave in the comments the word courage if you watched all the way to here. That simple little word will show me who really listened to my story until the end and is willing to be part of this network of support and love that we are building together. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Always remember, no matter how dark the night, the sun always shines again. And you, my dears, deserve to feel that brightness on your skin. You deserve days of peace, of love, of respect. And more than anything, you deserve to be happy.